From Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. In March of 1861, a Springfield lawyer caught a train to Washington. His name was Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't his first trip here. He'd served as a congressman 15 years before, and he returned in the beginning of the Civil War to serve as president. It was a different place than he knew it as congressman. In 15 years, it had changed a lot. The Spriggs boarding house across the street, which is now the Library of Congress, was gone. And this building was changing. Big changes. They're building a dome on the Capitol. But they were also in the earliest days of a war, and President Lincoln was counseled, stop building the dome. It costs too much money. We can't spend any more time on it. And he said, no, we're going to build that dome and we're going to finish it. That dome and this building will be a symbol of this country that will survive this Civil War and come back strong. So they built the dome, they won the war, and since those days, that dome and this building have been a symbol to this country, a symbol of unity and of hope. Tourists come through here before COVID-19 by the tens of thousands. And if you've ever noticed their tours, they're often shushed. People are saying, show some respect for this building. We know this building in the Rotunda as a place where some of the greatest American heroes of both political parties lie in state, and we go there to honor them. We know this building because we work here. We enact laws here that change America. We gather for State of the Union messages from presidents and honor the people in the gallery. This is a special place. This is a sacred place. But this sacred place was desecrated by a mob today on our watch. This temple to democracy was defiled by thugs who roam the halls and sat in that chair, Mr. Vice President, the one that you vacated at 2:15 this afternoon, sat and posed for pictures, those who were roaming around this chamber. What brought this on? Did this mob spring spontaneously from America? No. This mob was invited to come to Washington on this day by this president for one reason, because he knew the Electoral College vote was going to be counted this day. He wanted this mob to disrupt the constitutional process which we are part of. This mob was inspired by a president who cannot accept defeat. If you wonder whether I'm going too far in what I say, just read the transcript with the Secretary of State from Georgia and listen to this president's wild conspiracy theories, one after the other, swatted down by that Republican elected official and his attorney as having no basis in fact. This president begs, he coaxes, he even threatens that Secretary of State to find the votes he needs. In any other venue, that would be a simple, obvious crime. The lengths he'll go to are obvious. The Texas senator says to us, well, many people still agree with him, you know, when it gets down to the bottom line. Many people have fallen for this presidential position that it must have been a rigged election if I lost. Well, I would say that after we've lost count, 57 lawsuits, 62 lawsuits, I've heard so many numbers, after 90 different judges, after this president took his case, the best he could put together, to the highest court in the land across the street, where he had personally chosen 3 justices on the Supreme Court, I say to the senator from Texas, you know much more about that court than I do. I don't believe they let that paper that he sent up there even hit the desk before they laughed it out of the court. And that's the best he had to offer. No evidence whatsoever of this rigged election and this fraudulence. The senator from Texas says, we just want to create a little commission. 10 days, we're going to audit all the states, particularly the ones in contention here, and find out what actually occurred. And it really draws its parallel in 1876, Hayes and Tilden. Don't forget what that commission, that so-called political compromise, achieved. It was not just some ordinary governmental commission. It was a commission that killed Reconstruction, that established Jim Crow, that even after a civil war in which tore this nation apart, it re-enslaved African Americans. And it was a commission that invited the voter suppression we are still fighting today in America. Let me close by saying this. The vote we're going to have here is a clear choice of whether we are going to feed the beast of ignorance or we are going to tell the truth to the American people. We saw that beast today roaming the halls. Let's not invite it back.
Majority Leader.
President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Kansas, Senator Marshall.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Freedom of speech and the freedom to protest are provided in our Constitution. And I share the same frustrations many Americans have over the presidential election, the violence and mob rule which occurred at the U.S. Capitol today and across the country over the past year are unacceptable, and I condemn them at the highest level. And like all of us in the chamber, I'm thankful for the heroic law enforcement officers who worked feverishly to restore order so we get back to the electoral certification process. During my 29-year career as an obstetrician and gynecologist, too often I had to sit down with patients and give them a very bad diagnosis. It might have been a young mother of 3 who I delivered all 3 of her babies, now with metastatic breast cancer, or perhaps another woman with advanced cervical or ovarian cancer, all with a very challenging prognosis. But before I sat down with each one of those patients, I carefully reviewed all their labs, their x-rays, and their pathology to make sure I had the facts straight. But at the end of the day, my final recommendation was always going to be a recommendation from my heart. I want my fellow Kansans and all Americans to know that I've given as much consideration and thought surrounding the issue objecting to a state's Electoral College votes as I did considering the treatment plan for a serious health concern. And today's decision, once again, is from my heart. Mr. President, I rise today to restore integrity to our republic. And I rise to join the many of our colleagues who are all concerned for current and future generations. We must restore faith and confidence in one of our republic's most hallowed patriotic duties, voting. There's no question our U.S. Constitution empowers state legislatures to execute free, legal, and fair elections. Unfortunately, in several states, the clear authority of those state legislatures to determine the rules for voting were usurped by governors, secretaries of states, and activist courts. Our laws and Constitution should always be followed, especially in a time of crisis. I don't rise and do a state's legally obtained Electoral College votes. Rather, I rise in hopes of improving the integrity of the ballot to hold states accountable to the time-proven constitutional system of the Electoral College. This is why I urge the formation of an electoral commission to give constructive suggestions and recommendations the states can make to make our elections once again safe, free, and fair after a year of jarring irregularities.
We just wanted to break in here. This is Andrew Kraft. The senators are there on the floor getting their own 5 minutes. Well, the House is now in session as well. They're back after this hugely chaotic day, and Speaker Pelosi is up at the podium. Let's listen in.
To the American people. On Sunday, it was my great honor to be sworn in as Speaker and to preside over a sacred ritual of renewal as we gathered under this dome of this temple of democracy to open the 117th Congress. I said that as we were sworn in then, we accept a responsibility as daunting and demanding as any previous generation of leadership has ever faced. We know that we're in difficult times, but little could we have imagined the assault that was made on our democracy today. To those who strove to deter us from our responsibility, you have failed. To those who engaged in the gleeful desecration of this, our temple of democracy, American democracy, justice will be done. Today, January 6th, is the Feast of the Epiphany. On this day of revelation, let us pray that this instigation to violence will provide an epiphany for our country to heal. In that spirit of healing, I evoke the song of St. Francis. I usually do. St. Francis is the patron saint of my city of San Francisco, and his song of St. Francis is our anthem. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace. Where there is darkness, may I bring light. Where there is hatred, let us bring love. Where there is despair, let us bring hope. We know that we would be part of history in a positive way today, every 4 years, when we demonstrate again the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. And despite the shameful actions of today, we still will do so. We will be part of a history that shows the world what America is made of. That this assault is just that. It shows the weakness of those who've had to show through violence what their message was. My colleagues, it's time to move on. I wear this pin quite frequently. Actually, I gave it to our beloved John Lewis just a weekend or so before he left us. And it's a flag of our country, a flag of the United States of America. On it, it says, one country, one destiny. Country, one destiny, written on the flag. That was also what was embroidered in Abraham Lincoln's coat that he had on that fateful night. Lincoln's party, Lincoln's message, one country, one destiny. So on this holy day of Epiphany, let us pray. I'm a big believer in prayer. Let us pray that there will be peace on earth and that it will begin with us. Let us pray that God will continue to bless America. And with that, let us proceed with our responsibilities to the Constitution, to which we have just within 72 hours taken the oath to uphold. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, it is a sad day in America. It is a wrenching day in America. It is a day in which our words and our actions have had consequences of a very, very negative nature. We ought to watch our words and think what it may mean to some. My remarks were written before the tragic, dangerous, and unacceptable actions. And unacceptable is such a tame word. My remarks started with, Madam Speaker, the American people today are witnessing one of the greatest challenges to our democracy in its 244-year history. Little did I know that this Capitol would be attacked by the enemy within. I was here on 9/11 when we were attacked by the enemy without. We need to all work together to tame and reduce the anger. And yes, the hate that some stoke. What some, not all, Madam Speaker, but some in this House and in this Senate are doing today will not change the outcome of the election, which is the clear and insurmountable victory of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. Instead, all they will accomplish is to further the dangerous divisions. This was written before this Capitol was assaulted. Before this democracy was put aside by thousands. Encouraged by the Commander-in-Chief. Instead, all they will accomplish is to further the dangerous...
I just want to go back over to the Senate for a moment because Senator Rand Paul is speaking. Remember, he was one of the senators who had said that he wanted to object and contest earlier in the day before all this happened. So we're going to listen to him in what he is saying.
Overturn the verdict of states? Such a vote would be to overturn everything held dear by those of us who support the rights of states in this great system of federalism that was bequeathed to us by our founders. The Electoral College was created to devolve the power of selecting presidential electors to the states. The Electoral College is, without question, an inseparable friend to those who believe that every American across our vast country deserves to be heard. If Congress were to give the power to overturn the state's election, what terrible chaos would ensue every 4 years? Imagine the furor against the Electoral College if Congress becomes a forum to overturn states' Electoral College slates. It's one thing to be angry. It's another to focus one's anger in constructive ways. That hasn't happened today, to say the least. We simply cannot destroy the Constitution, our laws, and the Electoral College in the process. I hope as the nation's anger cools, we can channel that energy into essential electoral reforms at the state level. America's admired around the world for our free elections. We absolutely must fix this mess and restore confidence and integrity to our elections. We must.
Democratic leader.
Senator from Virginia, Senator Warner.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I think like most of us, I'm still pretty reeling from what happened today. What I was going to talk about was the work that I'm most proud of since I've been here with my good friend Richard Burr and all the members of the Intelligence Committee about a multi-year report we did into foreign interference in our elections. Probably our top recommendation of that 5-volume bipartisan report was that any official or candidate should use restraint and caution when questioning results of our elections. Because when you do so, you often carry out the goals of our foreign adversaries. Use caution because whether knowingly or unknowingly, and whether that adversary is in Russia or China or Iran, their goals are pretty simple. They want to make it appear to Americans, to folks around the world, to their own people, that there's nothing special about American democracy. I was going to try in a feeble way to maybe reach some of the rhetorical heights of Ben Sass, and I knew I couldn't do that. So instead, I know I'm violating rules here. Today's a day for violating rules. So this is a photo that appears today on one of the most prominent German newspapers. You don't need to draw up it. You can draw up photos from any newspaper or any television feed anywhere across the world. And what is this photo of? It's of thugs. Thugs in the halls of this Capitol, diminishing everything we say we believe in this democracy. And when you look at those images, realize those images are priceless for our adversaries. God willing, tonight, in an overwhelming way, we're going to take a small step in a bipartisan way to start restoring that trust of our people and hopefully the billions of people around the world who believe in that notion of American democracy. Remember, these images will still endure. I yield back.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Missouri, Senator Hawley.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, thank you. I want to begin this evening by saying thank you to the men and women of the Capitol Hill Police, the unarmed, the National Guardsmen, the Metropolitan Police, and others who came to this Capitol, who put their lives on the line to protect everyone here working inside of it. And I want to thank law enforcement all across this country, in my home state of Missouri and everywhere else, who do that day in and day out. And I just want to acknowledge that when it comes to violence, this has been a terrible year in America this last year. We've seen a lot of violence against law enforcement, and today we saw it here in the capital of the United States. And in this country, in the United States of America, we cannot say emphatically enough, violence is not how you achieve change. Violence is not how you achieve something better. Our Constitution was built and put into place so that there would be, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, no appeal from ballots to bullets, which is what we saw unfortunately attempted tonight. There is no place for that in the United States of America. And that's why I submit to my colleagues that what we're doing here tonight is actually very important. Because for those who have concerns about the integrity of our elections, those who have concerns about what happened in November, this is the appropriate means. This is the lawful place where those objections and concerns should be heard. This is the forum that the law provides for. Our laws provide for those concerns to be registered, not through violence, not by appealing from ballots to bullets, but here in this lawful process. And so to those who say that this is just a formality today, an antique ceremony that we've engaged in for a couple of hundred years, I can't say that I agree. I can't say that our precedents suggest that. I actually think it's very vital what we do. The opportunity to be heard, to register objections is very vital, because this is the place where those objections are to be heard and dealt with, debated, and finally resolved. In this lawful means, peacefully, without violence, without attacks, without bullets. And so, Mr. President, let me just say now briefly, in lieu of speaking about it later, a word about Pennsylvania, which is a state that I have been focused on, objected to, as an example of why people are concerned, millions of Americans concerned about our election integrity. The state of Pennsylvania, quite apart from allegations of any fraud, you have a state constitution that has been interpreted for over a century to say that there is no mail-in balloting permitted except for in very narrow circumstances that's also provided for in the law. And yet, last year, Pennsylvania elected officials passed a whole new law that allows universal mail-in balloting, and did it irregardless of what the Pennsylvania Constitution said. And then when Pennsylvania citizens tried to go and be heard on this subject before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they were dismissed on grounds of procedure, timeliness, in violation of that Supreme Court's own precedent. So the merits of the case have never been heard. The constitutionality of the statute actually has never been defended. I'm not aware of any court that has passed on its constitutionality. Actually, I'm not aware of anybody who's defended the constitutionality. And this was the statute that governed this last election, in which there were over 2.5 million mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. This is my point. That this is the forum. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court hasn't heard the case. There's no other court to go to hear the case in the state. And so this is the appropriate place for these concerns to be raised, which is why I have raised them here today. And I hope that this body will not miss the opportunity to take affirmative action to address the concerns of so many millions of Americans, to say to millions of Americans tonight that violence is never warranted, that violence will not be tolerated, that those who engage in it will be prosecuted, but that this body will act to address the concerns of all Americans across the country. We do need an investigation into irregularities, fraud. We do need a way forward together. We need election security reforms. I bet my friends on the other side of the aisle don't disagree with that. We need to find a way to move forward on that together so that the American people from both parties, all walks of life, can have confidence in their elections and that we can arrange ourselves under the rule of law that we share together. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Democratic leader.
Senator from Pennsylvania, Mr. Casey.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
I rise tonight to defend the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to defend the more than 6.9 million voters who voted in this election, and to condemn in the strongest possible terms this attempt to disenfranchise the voters of Pennsylvania based upon a lie, a falsehood. That same lie sowed the seeds of today's violence and today's lawlessness here in the Capitol. One of my constituents, Susan from the Lehigh Valley, the community of our state where Senator Toomey lives, recently wrote to my office and perhaps said it best. She said, and I quote, "We cannot allow anybody to overturn the legal votes of the citizens of Pennsylvania. This would be the ultimate destruction of our democracy," unquote. Susan had it right. We cannot allow anybody, and she put that word in all caps, to overturn the legal votes of the people of our state. Let me address the allegation regarding the Pennsylvania Constitution and the General Assembly. Somehow that the General Assembly didn't have the authority to enact no-excuse mail-in voting, that process for the people of our state. First, the law in question, Act 77, was passed in 2019 and was implemented without any serious question as to its constitutionality. The law was passed by a Republican-controlled General Assembly, House and Senate. It was only after the 2020 election when it became clear that President-elect Joe Biden won Pennsylvania by a little more than 80,000 votes, did some Republican politicians in our state decide to challenge the constitutionality of the law. Second, Act 77 is plainly constitutional. My colleagues allege that the state constitution requires in-person voting except under limited circumstances. This is not true. While Pennsylvania lays out specific situations in which absentee voting is required, there is no in-person requirement in our state's constitution. The Constitution set a floor, not a ceiling, for this type of voting. Second, apart from the argument made by my colleague, there's bipartisan agreement across our state, at the local, state, and federal level, that our election was fair, secure, and lawful. On Monday, my colleague from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, wrote in an op-ed, and I'm quoting, "The evidence is overwhelming that Joe Biden won this election," unquote. There's simply no evidence to justify the outrageous claims of widespread voter fraud or election irregularities suggested by those seeking to overturn the election. 60 cases, court after court, all throughout our state and throughout the country, including the Supreme Court, dealing with this bizarre argument that we know is based upon that lie. In one court, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, Judge Bibas, appointed by President Trump, He said, quote, "The campaign's claims have no merit," unquote. The United States, he said, has free and fair elections, which are the lifeblood of our democracy. Charges require specific allegations and then proof. We have neither here, unquote. So said Judge Bibas. Finally, Mr. President, a word about those election officials who did such work. These election officials all across our state, Republicans and Democrats, from red counties and blue counties, they did their jobs. They are patriots. And these objections are an attack on these Pennsylvania public servants. Give you one example. Republican Commissioner Al Schmidt, I should say, of Philadelphia. He wrote, and I said, and he wrote, as I said, I will quote as follows, quote, "There really should not be a disagreement, regardless of party affiliation, when we're talking about counting votes by eligible voters. It's not a very controversial thing, or at least it shouldn't be," unquote. After Election Day, Commissioner Al Schmidt, his family and his colleagues were subjected to death threats simply because he was trying to do his job with integrity. It calls to mind, Mr. President, that great line from America the Beautiful, "Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years." These election officials, like so many of our patriots, we heard from Senator Duckworth tonight, a real patriot. These patriots did their job. Let's support these patriots. Vote against this objection.
Majority Leader. I yield 5 minutes to the Senator from Utah, Senator Romney.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, today was heartbreaking, and I was shaken to the core as I thought about the people I met in China and Russia and Afghanistan and Iraq and other places who yearn for freedom and who look to this building and these shores as a place of hope. And I saw the images being broadcast around the world, and it breaks my heart. I have 25 grandchildren. Many of them were watching TV, thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. I knew I was okay. I must tell you as well, I was proud to serve with these men and women. This is an extraordinary group of people. I'm proud to be a member of the United States Senate and meet with people of integrity as we do here today. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he had deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. Fairly or not, they'll be remembered for their role in this shameful episode in American history. That will be their legacy. I salute Senator Langford and Loeffler and Braun and Daines, and I'm sure others, who in the light of today's outrage have withdrawn their objection. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who were upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I ask my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Democratic leader.
Senator from New Hampshire, Senator Shaheen.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, on January 3rd, I, along with 31 of my colleagues, stood in this chamber and swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's both ironic and deeply disappointing that only 3 days after swearing these oaths, some of my colleagues are willfully coming close to breaking this promise. Since 1797, each U.S. president has peacefully handed over power to the next. And that will happen again on January 20th, when Donald Trump, despite the protesters today, the violence today, when Donald Trump leaves the White House at noon and Joe Biden becomes president. And we've heard tonight from both Democrats and Republicans about the importance of the voters speaking in the election, and about the fact that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. But this is not just an issue for us here in the United States. This is an issue for nascent democracies around the world, who, as Senator Romney said, look to the United States as an example. We are the shining city on the hill. We give those struggling under oppression hope for a better future. Now, like so many of us in this chamber, I've traveled to developing democracies around the world, to Afghanistan and Iraq, to the Western Balkans, to Africa, to the country of Georgia. I went there with my colleague, Senator Risch. In 2012, we went to Georgia to observe officially, on behalf of the Senate, the election between outgoing President Mikhail Saakashvili and his United National Movement Party, and the challenge by Georgian Dream, which was a newly formed party supported and funded by billionaire oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. It was a battle for parliament, but also for control of the government. Senator Risch and I visited multiple polling places on election day, and we agreed with the international assessment that that election was free and fair and the Georgian Dream were the winners. But there was real concern in the country that Saakashvili was going to refuse to give up power, that would lead to violence, it would end the nascent democratic reforms that were happening in that former Soviet republic. And so Senator Risch and I, the day after the election, went to visit President Saakashvili to try and talk him out of staying in power. And I remember very clearly going to his home, and we sat down with him and we pointed out that the hallmark of a democracy, what he had worked so hard for in his 8 years as president of Georgia, the hallmark of that was to turn over power in a peaceful election to the person that the voters chose. Well, President Saakashvili listened to us, and he did leave office peacefully. But it's important that future generations recognize that America like democracies everywhere, depends on a peaceful transition of power, on believing in what the voters say and in ensuring that happens. Unfortunately, we've heard from some senators today who have been enabling President Trump's willful disregard of the votes of our citizenry, even as they speak out against foreign leaders who ignore their own people. They will fail, and history will remember them. And I hope that future generations will view the actions of some of those folks today as little more than an unfortunate anomaly. Future opportunists may use this ill-fated effort to seek short-term political gain over the long-term stability of our republic. But for the sake of our great country and America's standing in the world, I ask my colleagues today to fully endorse the results of the free and fair election and set aside this partisan attempt to subvert the will of the people. We should be venerating the peaceful transition of power, even if our own preferred candidate didn't win. That is, after all, who we are in the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Ohio, Senator Portman.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. Vice President, you have fulfilled your duties as President of the Senate tonight with distinction, and we all appreciate it. I thought if I changed my mind and not speaking tonight, given the lateness of the hour, and I know all of my colleagues would have appreciated that greatly, but I felt it was necessary to speak because I want the American people, particularly my constituents in Ohio, to see that we will not be intimidated, that we will not be disrupted from our work, that here in the citadel of democracy, we will continue to do the work of the people. Mob rule is not going to prevail here. Now, let's face it, we did not reclaim this chamber tonight. Brave and selfless law enforcement officers stood in the breach and ensured that the citadel of democracy would be protected and that we would be defended. And we are deeply grateful for that, as is the nation. I've listened carefully to the comments of my colleagues, and I've listened over the past couple of weeks as this issue has been discussed, and I tell you, for me, it's not a hard decision. I stand with the Constitution. I stand with what the Constitution makes clear. The people and the states hold the power here, not us. My oath to the Constitution and my reverence for our democratic principles make it easy for me to confirm these state certifications. By the way, I posed this process some 15 years ago when some Democrats chose to object to the electors from my home state of Ohio after the 2004 elections. I posed it then and I pose it now. I said at the time, Congress must not thwart the will of the people. That's what we would be doing. Let's assume for a moment that those who object to the certifications are right. That the Constitution intended that a bare majority of members of Congress could circumvent the states that have chosen to certify the popular votes of their own state citizens. I ask the objectors to think about the precedent that would be set if we were to do that. What if the majority in the House and the Senate was of the other party? What if a presidential candidate of our party came through a close presidential election? Would you want a Congress controlled by the Democrats to play the role you now intend for us? It is asking Congress to substitute its judgment for the judgment of the voters, and its judgment for the judgment of the states that certified the results. And even forgetting the dangerous precedent that would be set, what would be the basis for objecting in this election? Look, I voted for President Trump. I supported him because I believe the Trump administration's policies are better for Ohio and for the country. And I supported the Trump campaign's right to pursue recounts. They had every right to do it. And legal challenges. I agree that there were instances of fraud and irregularities in the 2020 elections. I think we all do. And by the way, there is fraud and irregularities in every presidential election. But it is also true that after 2 months of recounts and legal challenges, not a single state recount changed the result. And of the dozens of lawsuits filed, not one found evidence of fraud or irregularities widespread enough to change the result of the election. This was the finding of numerous Republican-appointed judges and the Trump administration's own Department of Justice. Every state has now weighed in and chosen to certify its electoral slate based on the popular vote as set out in the Constitution. I understand that many Americans who would never storm this Capitol don't trust the integrity of the 2020 election. Don't think the state should have certified. Don't think we should have accepted the results from the states and are insisting on more transparency and accountability. In the 2016 elections, lest we forget, many Democrats objected to the results and distrusted the election. I challenge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to listen, but also to do our part to try to restore faith in our elections. Mr. President, we should all work to improve the integrity of the electoral system and the confidence of the American people in this bedrock of our great democratic republic. Today I'll do my constitutional duty and oppose these efforts to reject the state-certified results. And tomorrow, in the wake of this attack on the Capitol, the pandemic that engulfs us and other national challenges, let's work together for the people. Yield back.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President, I believe we have 8 minutes left, so I'd like to divide 4 to Senator King and 4 to Senator Van Hollen.
That's correct, leader.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, Winston Churchill once said that he could do a 2-hour speech extemporaneously, but a 10-minute speech took immense preparation. I don't know what he would have said about a 4-minute speech. We are a 240-year anomaly in world history. We think that what we have here in this country is the way it's always been. It is a very unusual form of government. The normal form of government throughout world history is dictators, kings, czars, pharaohs, warlords, tyrants. And we thought 20 years ago the march of history was toward democracy, but it is in retreat in Hungary and Turkey. Goodness knows in Russia. Democracy as we have practiced it is fragile. It's fragile and it rests upon trust. It rests upon trust in facts. It rests upon trust in courts, in public officials, and yes, in elections. I don't sympathize or justify or in any way support, that's putting it mildly, what happened here today, but I understand it. I understand it because I saw those people interviewed today and they said, we're here because this election has been stolen. And the reason they said that is that their leader has been telling them that every day for 2 months. We cannot afford to pull bricks out from the foundation of trust that underlies our entire system. And I agree with Governor Romney that the answer to this problem is to tell people the truth, is to tell them what happened. It's easy to confront your opponents. It's hard to confront your friends. It's hard to tell your supporters something they don't want to hear. But that's our obligation. That's why the word leader is applied to people in jobs like ours. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be something that we take on as a sacred obligation. And if people believe something that isn't true, it's our obligation to tell them, no, I'm sorry, it isn't. Just as Senator Portman just said, as Mike Lee just said, I'm sorry, we can't do this here. We don't want to do this here. This is a power reserved to the states, not to the Congress. And I agree with the majority leader. I think this is one of the most important votes any of us will ever take. On December 1st, 1862, Abraham Lincoln came to this building. He came to this building in the darkest days of the Civil War. He was trying to awaken the Congress to the crisis that we were facing. And he didn't feel that they were fully and effectively engaged. And he ended his speech that day with words that I think have an eerie relevance tonight. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said. Fellow Americans, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. And here's his final words. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The mob violence and attack we saw on our Capitol today should be a wake-up call to each and every one of us of what happens when we fail to come together, not as Democrats and Republicans, but each of us as Americans, to stand up to a president who time and again has shown contempt for our democracy, contempt for our Constitution. Today here on the Capitol, we witnessed people taking down an American flag and putting up a Trump flag. That is not democracy in the United States of America. As every senator who has spoken has mentioned, we have for hundreds of years had a peaceful transfer of power. Nobody likes to lose, and supporters of the losing candidate are always disappointed. What's different this time? We all know what's different this time. We had a president who, as a senator from New Jersey said, even before a vote was cast, that if he didn't win the election, it was going to be a fraud. And every day since then has perpetrated that lie. We have a president who just today criticized a very loyal vice president who's presiding right now, urging him to disregard his responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States in order to reinstall Donald Trump as president. The same person who got on the phone to the Secretary of State in Georgia and threatened him to change the results of the election. Mr. President, I read something this week I never thought I'd read in a newspaper in the United States of America. It was an op-ed by all the living former secretaries of defense, including Secretaries Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Mattis, warning the country about our tradition of peaceful transfer of power and that it would be inappropriate for the military to take sides. In the United States of America, we talk to the world about how we want to promote democracy, our values, and right here at home, too many are undermining those values. And Mr. President, Donald Trump could not do this alone. He could only do it if he's aided and abetted by individuals who are willing to perpetrate those lies and those conspiracies. And that is why it is so important that we as Democrats and Republicans and senators stand up together. Stand up together and tell the truth. You know, when you go into a court of law like those 60 cases, you're testifying under penalty of perjury. That's very different than here in the House and the Senate. And in all those 60 cases under penalty of perjury, there was no evidence of widespread fraud. So it should be easy for us all together to tell the truth. On January 20th, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the next president of the United States. He has said he wants to bring the country together. He has said he wants to bring Democrats and Republicans together to do some of the pressing business of this country, to defeat this pandemic, to get the economy going again, to face challenging issues of racial and social justice. I hope we will learn from what happened today, the mob attack on this Capitol, the price we pay when we don't stand up for the truth and for democracy. James McHenry, Maryland's delegate to the Constitutional Convention, wrote about a famous exchange in his diaries between Elizabeth Willing Powell and Benjamin Franklin. Wrote, a lady asked Dr. Franklin, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? A republic, replied Dr. Franklin, if you can keep it. My colleagues, this is a test of whether we're united to keep our republic. I hope we will pass the test together. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from South Carolina, Senator Graham.
Senator from South Carolina.
Many times my state has been the problem. I love it. It's where I want to die, but no time soon. Tim and I have a good relationship. I love Tim Scott. 1876, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida sent 2 slate of electors. They had 2 governments, by the way, and we didn't know what to do. Why did South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana do it? To hold the country hostage to end Reconstruction. It worked. The commission was 8-7. It didn't work. Nobody accepted it. The way it ended is when Hayes did a deal with these 3 states. You give me the electors, I'll kick the Union Army out. The rest is history. It led to Jim Crow. If you're looking for historical guidance, this is not the one to pick. If you're looking for a way to convince people there was no fraud, having a commission chosen by Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and John Roberts is not going to get you to where you want to go. It ain't going to work. So it's not going to do any good. It's going to delay, and it gives credibility to a dark chapter of our history. That's why I'm not with you. But I will fight to my death for you. You're able to object. You're not doing anything wrong. Other people have objected. I just think it's a uniquely bad idea to delay this election. Trump and I, we've had a hell of a journey. I hate it to end this way. Oh my God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful. But when the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that they didn't violate the Constitution of Wisconsin, I agree with the 3, but I accept the 4. If Al Gore can accept 5-4, he's not president. I can accept Wisconsin 4-3. Pennsylvania, it went to the Second Circuit. So much for all the judges being in Trump's pocket. They said, no, you're wrong. I accept the Pennsylvania Second Circuit that Trump's lawsuit wasn't right. Georgia, they said the Secretary of State took the law in his own hands. He changed the election laws unlawfully. A federal judge said no. I accept the federal judge even though I don't agree with it. Fraud. They said there's 66,000 people in Georgia under 18 voted. How many people believe that? I asked, give me 10. I hadn't had one. They said 8,000 felons in prison in Arizona voted. Give me 10. I hadn't gotten one. Does that say there's problems in every election? I don't buy this. Enough's enough. We got to end it. Vice President Pence, what they're asking you to do, you won't do because you can't. You talk about interesting times. I associate myself with Rand Paul. How many times will you hear that? The mob has done something nobody else could do to get me and Rand to agree. Rand is right. If you're a conservative, this is the most offensive concept in the world, that a single person could disenfranchise 155 million people. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president. Where in there does it say Mike can say, I don't like the results? I want to send them back to the states. I believe there was fraud. To the conservatives who believe in the Constitution, now's your chance to stand up and be counted. Originalism, count me in. It means what it says. So, Mike, Mr. Vice President, just hang in there. They said we can count on Mike. All of us can count on the Vice President. You're going to do the right thing. You're going to do the constitutional thing. You got a son who flies F-35s. You got a son-in-law who flies F-18s. They're out there flying so that we can get it right here. There are people dying, to my good friend from Illinois, to make sure we have a chance to argue among ourselves. And when it's over, it is over. It is over. The final thing, Joe Biden. I've traveled the world with Joe. I hoped he lost. I prayed he would lose. He won. He's a legitimate president of the United States. I cannot convince people, certain groups, by my words, but I will tell you by my actions, that maybe I, above all others in this body, need to say this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are lawfully elected and will become the president and the vice president of the United States on January the 20th.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield back the balance of our time.
All time has expired. The question is, shall the objections submitted by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, and the senator from Texas, Mr. Cruz, and others, be sustained? Is there a second? There is. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. No. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker. No. Mr. Bozeman. No. Mr. Braun. No. Mr. Brown. No. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham.
No.
Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Harris. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Holy. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. No. Mr. Hoban. I got excited. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe.
No.
Mr. Johnson.
No.
Mr. Kane.
No.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye.
Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee.
No.
Mrs. Leffler. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran.
No.
Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Paul.
No.
Mr. Peters. Mr. Portman. Mr. Reed. Mr. Risch. Mr. Romney. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sass. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young.
And I want to just break in here. This is Andrew Kraft with News Now from Fox. Senators are voting at the moment on whether or not to pass or deny the objection to the Arizona electors. Remember, those were 11 electors for Joe Biden who won the state of Arizona. At the moment, we know those who voted in favor to oppose those electors, Senators Cruz, Hawley, Hyde-Smith, Kennedy, Marshall, and Tuberville. Let's listen in again. And this is Andrew Kraft once again. Like I said, those senators who voted yes to the Arizona objection include Senators Cruz, Hawley, Hyde-Smith of Mississippi, Kennedy of Louisiana, Loomis of Wyoming, Marshall of Kansas, Tuberville of Alabama. At the moment, we're getting just some information regarding curfew in DC at the moment. Washington police have arrested 30 people for curfew violations tonight. That's according to the mayor's office. In total, 13 people were transported by ambulance as a result of the violent incidents at the Capitol today. We've been showing you the House and the Senate chamber. Time is almost wrapping up in the House to deliberate these objections to Arizona's slate of 11 electors that will go to Joe Biden. But at the moment, 7 senators have voted yes to object to the Arizona electors. We're monitoring right now. We see the podium at the DC mayor's office, so we'll go to that in case she comes up and speaks and gives an update on what I just told you. Let's listen in to Vice President Mike Pence.
Ready to proceed to joint session with further counting of the electoral vote for president and vice president. Majority Leader.
Mr. President. So, colleagues, here's where we are. We have a few more speakers now as we wait for the House to finish their debate and vote. We expect the House to finish voting on Arizona between 11:30 and midnight. I ask unanimous consent the Senate be in a period of morning business with the following senators permitted to speak therein for up to 5 minutes each. Senator Toomey, Senator Rubio, Senator Collins.
And on our side, Senators Wyden, Hirono, and Cooley.
Finally, following their remarks, the Senate stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
No.
Maybe not. We may have. Okay, so we'll figure it out.
The Senate be in a period of morning business with the following senators permitted to speak therein for up to 5 minutes each. Toomey, Rubio, Collins.
Wyden, Hirono, and Cooley.
Without objection.
Not many will. Is this isn't yours, right? Got it.
So we're in recess.
All right, and we just are monitoring some of these shots here. We do want to take it back over to the U.S. chamber in the House and listen to what they're saying. Remember, they still have remaining time in this 2-hour objection, this 2-hour debate period. So we're going to listen to the House, and then we do have, at the moment, we're waiting right now for D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and D.C. Police to give us an update on what exactly happened today in the nation's capital. But for now, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we're going to go to the House chamber for more deliberations on their taking up of the objection to the Arizona electors.
For the first time ever, Hell's Kitchen will take place in Las Vegas. Get out! Everything in Vegas is a gamble. Get in the game.
Hell's Kitchen Las Vegas premieres tomorrow on Fox.
How you voted. This election was administered with integrity, transparency, and in accordance with state laws. The fact is, the president and his campaign and several Republican-led groups filed 8 election lawsuits, all of which were dismissed. The Arizona Supreme Court a body where all justices have been appointed by Republican governors, unanimously dismissed the case. The justices found that the party had failed to present any evidence of misconduct or illegal votes, let alone establish any degree of fraud or a significant error rate that would undermine the certainty of the election results. After these judicial rulings, the governor said, "I trust our election system. There's integrity in our election system." The fact is, Joe Biden is the certified winner of Arizona's 11 electoral votes. Arizona's the facts and came to this conclusion. I urge my colleagues to do the same. To my colleagues across the aisle, I know we may disagree on who we want as president. But what we personally want is not what matters here. Rather, the people's influence, as reflected in the certified Electoral College results, is what matters. Facts matter. Make us vulnerable to foreign actors who would do us harm. For the good of our country, this must stop. Now is the time to come together, to preserve our democracy, and to protect our national security. I know my constituents are looking to Congress to move past its divisions, find common ground, and pass legislation to improve the lives of struggling families. We must stay focused on fighting the pandemic. We must work to ensure all Americans can be vaccinated as soon as possible so we can save American lives. Safely reopen schools, get people back to work, and visit loved ones again. I urge my colleagues to follow this, and Madam Speaker, I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to claim time in support of the objection.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes without objection.
Madam Speaker, one of the first things we did when the House convened today was to join together to extend our grace and our kindness and our concern for a colleague who has experienced just an insurmountable amount of grief with his family. And I want all of our fellow Americans watching to know that we did that because we care about each other and we don't want bad things to happen to each other. And our heart hurts when they do. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of folks over there who don't like me too much, and there are a few of you that I don't care for too much, but if anybody had been hurt today, it would have been even more of a catastrophe than we already saw, and I think that's an important point for the country. Another important point for the country is that this morning, President Trump explicitly called for demonstrations and protests to be peaceful. He was far more, you can moan and groan, but he was far more explicit about his calls for peace than some of the BLM and left-wing rioters were this summer when we saw violence sweep across this nation. Now, we came here today to debate, to follow regular order, to offer an objection, to follow a process that is expressly contemplated in our Constitution. And for doing that, we got called a bunch of seditious traitors. Now, not since 1985 has a Republican president been sworn in, absent some Democrat effort, to object to the electors. But when we do it, it is the new violation of all norms. And when those things are said, people get angry. Now, I know there are many countries where political violence may be necessary, but America is not one such country. Madam Speaker, it was wrong when people vandalized and defaced your home. It was wrong when thugs went to Senator Hawley's home. And I don't know if the reports are true, but the Washington Times has just reported some pretty compelling evidence from a facial recognition company showing that some of the people who breached the Capitol today were not Trump supporters. They were masquerading as Trump supporters and, in fact, were members of the violent terrorist group Antifa. Now, we should seek to build America up, not tear her down and destroy her. And I am sure glad that at least for one day, I didn't hear my Democrat colleagues calling to defund the police. Now, I appreciate all the talk.
Now, I appreciate all the talk of coming together, but let us not pretend that our colleagues on the left have been free of some anti-democratic impulses just because we signed on to legal briefs and asked courts to resolve disputes. There were some on the left who said that we should not even be seated in the body, that we ought to be prosecuted, maybe even jailed. Those arguments anger people, but people do understand the concepts of basic fairness. And no competition, contest, or election can be deemed fair if the participants are subject to different rules. Baseball teams that cheat and steal signs should be stripped of their championships. Russian Olympians who cheat and use steroids should be stripped of their medals, and states that do not run clean elections should be stripped of their electors. This fraud was systemic. It was repeated. It was the same system, and I dare say it was effective. We saw circumstances where when Democrat operatives couldn't get the outcomes they wanted in state legislators, when they couldn't get the job done there, they went and pressured and litigated and usurped the Constitution with extra constitutional action of some officials in some states. They fraudulently laundered ballots, votes, voter registration forms, and then they limited review. In 2016, Democrats found out that they couldn't beat Donald Trump at the ballot box with voters who actually show up, so they turned to impeachment and the witness box. And when that failed, they ran to the mailbox, where this election saw an unprecedented amount of votes that could not be authenticated with true ID, with true signature match, and with true confidence for the American people. Our Article 3 courts have failed by not holding evidentiary hearings to weigh the evidence. We should not join in that failure. We should vindicate the rights of states. We should vindicate the subpoenas in Arizona that have been issued to get a hold of these voting machines, and we should reject these electors. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the objection.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield my time to the Dean of the Arizona delegation, Mr. Grijalva.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the gentle lady from Colorado for yielding time. I'll be very brief, Madam Speaker. There's really nothing left to say. This challenge brought by members of this House, Republican members from this House from Arizona, and a senator from Texas. The whole discussion today, this challenge to the 11 electoral votes that are designated for President Biden and Vice President Harris, the discussion today proved there is no merit to denying those electoral votes. There's no legal standing. The courts have proven that in Arizona time and time again. There is no precedent. There is no constitutional violation. But we're here today, Madam Speaker, because of one man and those who are desperate to please him. So what do we have to show for this process today? Fear, a lockdown, violence, and regrettably and sadly death, arrest, present and real danger, threats, and assault on our institution, this House, this Congress, and the very democracy that we practice here. And to what end? What did we accomplish? The reality is that the challenge will be defeated come January 20th. President Biden and President Harris will be the President and Vice President of the United States. So what did we accomplish? To further divide this nation, to continue to fan the same rhetoric of division and us versus them, to paralyze and dismantle our democracy, Is that what we attempted to accomplish today? The mob that attacked this institution, I hold no member specifically responsible for that madness that was around us. But we do share a responsibility, my friends, to end it. It's past time to accept reality, to reaffirm our democracy, and move on. I would urge my colleagues from Arizona who filed this challenge to withdraw their challenge to Arizona and to the electors that have been chosen to give their 11 votes to the winners in that election. But if that doesn't happen, then I would urge my colleagues to reject this challenge and defend all voters, defend the voters of Arizona, and that democracy that we practice daily in the representation of our constituents. That's what's at stake today. And with that, I yield back to the gentlelady from Colorado and thank her for the time.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, on Sunday, every member in this chamber took an oath to uphold the Constitution. And there's only one vote tonight for those who took that oath. And that vote is to reject this challenge. I yield back.
All the time for debate has expired. The question is, shall the objection to the Arizona Electoral College vote count submitted by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, and the senator from Texas, Mr. Cruz, be agreed to? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no? No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Speaker?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
We'd ask for a roll call.
The yeas and nays have been requested pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device and are reminded to vote when their group is called.
All right, everyone, this is Andrew Kraft with news now from Fox. It's 8:30 here Mountain Time, 10:30 there on the House floor. in the east coast of the nation's capital. The House is now voting on that challenge to Arizona's electors, those 11 electors, the slate that goes to Joe Biden. The objection failed in the Senate, 93-6, and we'll see what the outcome is in the House just momentarily. You can see the vote tallies are up on your screen at the moment. We're watching a lot of different feeds right now, expecting DC Mayor Muriel Bowser to speak sometime tonight. We don't have exact timing, and the Chief of DC Police. We're going to go back to the Senate. Remember, after this vote takes place and is tallied, they have to reconvene in that joint session. And we will bring that to you live here. It's been an emotional, historic, and unprecedented day. And I say none of that lightly. And that's not meant to be hyperbolic. We've been bringing you these scenes all day of the chaos and the violence in the U.S. Capitol. Where, might I remind our viewers, one woman was shot dead. Fox News has now identified that woman. We're going to be reading from the article on foxnews.com about who that woman was. She's been identified as Ashley Babbitt, according to a friend who confirmed the news to Fox. She was a 14-year veteran. She served 4 tours with the Air Force and lived in San Diego. According to our sister station in DC, Fox 5, her husband told the station that she was a strong supporter of the president. Fox 5 DC also talked to her mother-in-law, who, quote, said, apparently, I really don't know why she decided to do this. Apparently, Babbitt's husband was not in DC with her. The couple owned a business together. Early reports said a woman was shot in the chest and transported from the building just before 3 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon. We still do not know who fired the shot or what led to the shooting. At this time, as you know, the Senate and the House is in session, and we are waiting these vote tallies to be conducted by the clerks in the House. We're going to go back and listen in. While these votes are tallied, we want to take it back over now to the Senate, where Senator Marco Rubio from the state of Florida is up at the lectern. Let's listen into that.
And turn the page and have a future even brighter than our past. And so that's why I feel so strongly about this, and why I hope those who disagree with me will understand. I yield the floor.
The senator from Hawaii is recognized.
Mr. President, it has been hard at times to find the words to describe the full harm Donald Trump has inflicted on our country. We can spend hours dissecting how his policies have made us less safe, less healthy. But his presidency has also been a profound moral failure. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, a father from Hawaii joined me at one of my talk story sessions in my office, and he asked me a question that struck me hard at that time and has stuck with me until today. He said, "How can I tell my son that lying is not okay when the President of the United States lies every single day?" I struggled to answer his question then, and I'm not sure I could offer an adequate answer now. But this conversation remains a clear example of how we do not live in normal times. How is it normal as we and the world watched in horror as an angry mob stormed the United States Capitol? Blood was shed, people were hurt, vandalism occurred. It is not normal when we have a president who lies every single day, and even in the face of this vandalism, this mob, he really doesn't have much to say except, "I love you, you should go home now." It's not normal when in the middle of a pandemic that has claimed the lives of over 350,000 Americans, which is nearly the combined population of the islands of Maui and the Big Island, we have a president who only seems to care about spreading conspiracies to undermine confidence in our elections and our democracy. And it's not normal when duly elected senators who took an oath to uphold the Constitution pull a stunt to try and nullify millions of votes in 6 states so that Donald Trump can remain president. I call this effort a stunt because it is doomed to fail. We have a strong bipartisan majority, as noted in the vote that we just took, and both chambers of Congress who reject this stunt. And courts have ruled against Trump and his allies in more than 60 cases. So whenever this farce ends, the result will be the same. Donald Trump will have lost the election, and Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States. You can tell a lot about a person from the way they handle defeat. The way Donald Trump has handled defeat says a lot about who he is. Watching so many of our colleagues indulge the president tells us a lot about them, too. We don't have to look back very far in history to find examples of candidates who lost tough races but demonstrated their character in defeat. Our colleague, Senator Romney, graciously conceded his defeat to President Obama in noting that, and quote, "At a time like this, we can't risk partisan bickering and political posturing. Our leaders have to reach across the aisle to do the people's work, and we citizens also have to rise to the occasion." And in 2000, during an election with substantial irregularities and partisan intervention from the Supreme Court, Al Gore nevertheless put his country first, and he said, "Let there be no doubt that while I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession." As I reflect on the service of these distinguished public servants and the acts they took to maintain our democracy, I'm also drawn to remarks President Obama made 4 years ago in his farewell address to the nation when he warned that our democracy is threatened whenever we take it for granted. It is a particularly sage warning as we contend with the President of the United States seeking to nullify a free and fair election simply because he lost. We have to stand up, speak out, and fight back because our democracy itself is at stake. American democracy has endured over the centuries in large part because our institutions serve as guardrails to keep us from going over the cliff. As elected officials, we can strengthen these guardrails by listening to our own conscience in moments of peril by having what our friend John Lewis called an executive session with myself. Before making a big decision, John would say, listen, self, this is what you must do. This is where you must go. Today, we can follow John's example. Listen to our conscience. Stand up for our Constitution and do what's right. I yield the floor.
The senator from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me begin my remarks tonight by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to the members of the law enforcement community and the National Guard, whose hard work and courage made it possible for us to resume our deliberations tonight. We return to this chamber tonight undeterred by the violence we witnessed and strengthened in our determination to fulfill our constitutional duty. Mr. President, the Constitution is the foundation of our American election. The process the Constitution sets forth for electing presidents through the Electoral College is straightforward. The people vote. Electors are chosen. The electors vote. Then Congress counts the electors' votes. That final step in the process is why we have convened today. Counting the votes of the electors, a function that the 12th Amendment assigns to Congress, is an administrative and largely ceremonial act. Our job is simply to count the votes certified by each state, nothing more. We should not attempt to usurp the roles of the voters, the states, or the Electoral College. Mr. President, the American people have done their job, turning out in record numbers to vote in the midst of a frightening pandemic. Indeed, as a percentage of the voting eligible population, the turnout was the highest in 120 years. Similarly, in the midst of this pandemic, hundreds of election officials and volunteers have done their job, staffing polling places and